Imagine a story so powerful that it has shaped civilizations, inspired countless works of art, and influenced billions of lives across thousands of years. The story of creation, of the origins of humanity, and the universe itself, found in the very first chapters of the Bible, in the book of Genesis. But here's the question that has sparked debates for centuries: are these stories meant to be taken as literal history, facts handed down from divine truth, or are they ancient myths, symbolic narratives crafted to teach moral and spiritual lessons? For some, Genesis is the bedrock of their faith, a literal account of how everything came into being. For others, it's a poetic masterpiece, rich with allegory and symbolism, reflecting the worldview and culture of ancient peoples. And many find themselves somewhere in the middle, seeking to reconcile faith with scientific understanding. In this video, we're going to explore both sides of this age-old debate, delve into the biblical perspectives, examine scientific evidence, explore the ancient myths that may have influenced Genesis, and see how modern scholars and believers are seeking answers today. Whether you're a devout believer, a curious skeptic, or someone questioning what's true, this journey into the origins of the Bible and humanity will challenge your thinking, inspire new questions, and perhaps even shift your perspective. So, grab a seat, open your mind, and let's explore the fascinating question: is the book of Genesis fact or mythology?
The Bible Debate, the Book of Genesis, Fact or Mythology? Welcome back to the Bible Debate, where we explore the big questions, challenge assumptions, and seek understanding. Today, we're diving into a topic that has sparked debate for centuries: the Book of Genesis, fact or mythology? Is Genesis a literal historical account, or is it a mythological story crafted to explain the origins of life and the universe? Throughout history, believers, skeptics, scientists, and scholars have debated this question. Some see Genesis as literal truth, others as allegory, and some as a combination of both. So, let's embark on this journey to explore the different perspectives, evidence, and interpretations. Let's begin with an overview. The Book of Genesis is the first book of the Bible, traditionally attributed to Moses, written around the 15th or 13th century BCE, though its final form probably took shape centuries later. Genesis covers a wide array of stories. The creation of the universe in 6 days. The creation of Adam and Eve. The fall and original sin. Cain and Abel. The Great Flood and Noah's Ark. The Tower of Babel. The origins of nations and languages. These stories are foundational for Judeo-Christian beliefs but also have parallels in ancient Near Eastern cultures. The central question we're asking today is: are these stories literal historical events, or are they mythological stories meant to convey spiritual truths? Historically, interpretations have varied widely. Some early Christian theologians, like Augustine, believed in a non-literal interpretation, while others, like young Earth creationists, insist on a literal reading. Today, debates continue among scientists, theologians, and scholars. The biblical perspective. From the religious point of view, many believers hold that Genesis is the literal Word of God, historically accurate in every detail. Young Earth creationists interpret Genesis as describing a young universe, about 6,000 to 10,000 years old. They point to biblical genealogies, such as those in Genesis 5 and 11, and calculate the age of the earth by adding the ages of early patriarchs. For instance, figures like Kenham argue that the 6 days of creation were 24-hour days, based on a literal reading of Genesis 1. Other Christians take a more allegorical approach. The Catholic Church, for example, officially states that Genesis should not necessarily be read as a literal historical account but as a theological and spiritual truth. The Vatican's Catechism emphasizes that the stories communicate truths about God, creation, and human nature, but not necessarily scientific details. Different denominations interpret Genesis differently. Fundamentalists, literal 6-day creation, global flood, Adam and Eve as real historical persons. Progressive Christians view stories as symbolic, aiming to teach moral or spiritual lessons rather than historical facts. The biblical perspective is diverse, ranging from literalism to allegory, reflecting different theological and doctrinal positions. The scientific perspective. Now, let's consider what science says. The consensus among scientists is that the universe is approximately 13.8 billion years old, based on observations of cosmic microwave background radiation and the expansion of space. The Earth, according to radiometric dating of rocks and fossils, is about 4.5 billion years old. The theory of evolution by natural selection, first proposed by Charles Darwin, explains the diversity of life as a result of gradual change over billions of years. The fossil record provides evidence of transitional forms, such as Archaeopteryx, a link between dinosaurs and birds, Tiktaalik, a fish with limb-like fins, and hominid fossils tracing human evolution. Contradictions with Genesis. The literal interpretation of Genesis suggests the universe was created in 6 days, a timeline incompatible with scientific evidence. The story of Adam and Eve as the first humans contradicts evidence of human evolution, which shows a common ancestor shared with other primates. The global flood narrative is challenged by geological and archaeological data, which show no evidence of a single catastrophic flood covering the entire planet at one time. Bridging the gap. Some scientists and theologians advocate for theistic evolution, the idea that God used evolution as a tool for creation. Prominent figures like Francis Collins, a geneticist and Christian, argue that scientific findings and faith can coexist. Science supports an ancient universe and evolutionary processes, which seem at odds with a literal reading of Genesis, but many see no contradiction if Genesis is interpreted metaphorically or as poetic. Historical and cultural context. To understand Genesis, we must consider its historical and cultural context. The ancient Near East was full of creation myths and flood stories shared among civilizations like the Babylonians, Assyrians, and Egyptians. For example, the Enuma Elish, Babylon's creation myth, describes a chaoskampf, battle with chaos, gods creating the world from the body of a primordial creature. The Epic of Gilgamesh, which includes a flood story remarkably similar to Noah's Ark, predates Genesis by centuries. Many scholars see Genesis as a biblical adaptation or rejection of these older myths. It redefines the divine, emphasizing one God over multiple gods, and presents a monotheistic worldview. In this context, Genesis stories could have served to establish cultural identity, moral order, and theological statements rather than strict historical accounts. This perspective helps explain why Genesis contains myth-like elements, symbolic language, poetic structures, and cultural motifs, rather than strict scientific detail. Mythology or history? So, where does that leave us? Is Genesis mythology or history? The answer depends on perspective. Arguments for mythology. Similarities with other ancient myths, e.g., Enuma Elish, Gilgamesh, suggest shared cultural motifs. The stories use allegorical language, poetic structures, and symbolic imagery, characteristics of myth. Archaeological evidence does not support a global flood or a literal Adam and Eve as the first humans. Arguments for history. Religious faith and tradition uphold the historicity of Genesis events. Many believe these stories are divinely inspired, and thus, true in a spiritual or moral sense. Some archaeological findings, such as early settlements in the Near East, align with biblical narratives of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and the Israelite origins. The moral and spiritual truths conveyed, about human nature, sin, and divine justice, are seen as universally valid, regardless of literal historical accuracy. The middle ground, many scholars, theologians, and believers see Genesis as a mixture. Some events may have historical roots, but the stories are also rich with mythological symbolism to communicate spiritual truths. Modern interpretations and debates. Literalists argue that Genesis is historically accurate, emphasizing faith and divine inspiration. They often cite biblical inerrancy and the importance of maintaining doctrinal fidelity. Non-literalists or symbolic interpretation advocates see Genesis as poetic or allegorical, emphasizing the spiritual lessons rather than factual accuracy. The scientific community generally leans toward evolution and an ancient universe, but many religious scientists, like Francis Collins or Kenneth Miller, see no conflict between science and faith. Academic circles are diverse, from young Earth creationism to theistic evolution, to secular humanism. The debate is ongoing, reflecting broader questions about the nature of truth, faith, and evidence. Personal reflection. What do you believe? Is Genesis fact, myth, or a blend of both? Some see the stories as literal history, affirming divine truth. Others see them as profound myths, literary and spiritual narratives that reveal deep truths about human nature and our relationship with God. Perhaps, the key is in understanding that these stories have shaped civilizations, inspired art, and offered moral guidance for millennia. Whatever your stance, one thing is clear: Genesis continues to challenge and inspire us to explore our origins and purpose. The pursuit of truth is a personal journey, and respectful dialogue helps us learn from each other. Thanks for joining this exploration. If you found this video thought-provoking, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you see Genesis as fact, myth, or a mixture? Remember, the quest for understanding is unending. Keep questioning, keep seeking, and stay curious. Join us in our next video where we explore another intriguing aspect of the Bible debate: was Adam the first human on Earth? Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss this very informative exposition. Until then, keep exploring the big questions.